Ryan hadn't told anyone he was struggling. Not his brother, not his closest friend, not the woman he dated for 7 months who genuinely seemed to care about him. When she asked what was going on inside his head, he smiled and said nothing much, and meant it. Not because he was hiding something, but because somewhere along the way the inside of his head had gone quiet in a way that felt permanent. No longing, no grief, no hope. Just this flat, functional calm that looked like strength from the outside and felt like concrete from the inside. He was 36. He had goals. He had a routine. He had a life that worked. And he had quietly, without ceremony, given up on ever being truly loved, or truly loving anyone back. What's wild is he didn't think anything was wrong. This channel, Psyche Shift, exists for moments like this. The invisible psychological patterns that shape entire lives without ever showing up on a diagnosis. This particular pattern, men drifting into men, emotional shutdown and calling it growth, might be the quietest epidemic happening right now across an entire generation. There's no dramatic scene, no screaming match, no rock bottom that gets remembered later as the turning point. The moment a man gives up on love is almost always silent. It happened somewhere between the 3rd time he reached toward someone and got nothing back, and the morning he woke up and realized he hadn't reached toward anyone in months. And it felt fine. That's the detail that matters, not the pain, the absence of pain. Because when the longing disappears, when the ache of wanting connection stops aching, that's not healing, that's adaptation. And there's a significant psychological difference between those two things. Healing means the wound closed and the capacity for feeling came back intact. Adaptation means the system rerouted. The capacity for feeling is still there, technically, but it's been sealed off from the places it used to go. Psychologists who study attachment patterns call this deactivating strategy. When the brain, after repeated experiences of emotional unavailability or rejection, starts suppressing attachment needs before they can fully surface. It's not a conscious choice. It runs below the level of decision-making. The man isn't sitting down and deciding, I won't care anymore. His nervous system is doing it automatically, the same way it learned to flinch before a loud sound fully registers. And look, there's a reason this happens. The body and the mind are always solving problems. If every time you extended emotional trust, something went wrong, if vulnerability consistently produced pain with no repair, no acknowledgement, no safe landing, the most logical adaptive response is to stop extending it. The system learns. That's not weakness. That's pattern recognition doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem isn't that the system learned the wrong thing. The problem is that it learned from old data and never got updated. So where do you actually go from there? Before anything else, you have to be honest about what's actually happening. Not the story you've built around it, but the underlying function. Ask yourself, am I genuinely at peace, or have I just stopped feeling the discomfort of not being at peace? Those are wildly different states that can look nearly identical from the outside. Now, a lot of people watching this would assume the solution is obvious. Just open up, just try again. But that framing skips about 15 layers of what's actually going on beneath the surface. Because the shutdown doesn't just affect romantic relationships. It rewires how a man relates to everything. And once you see the full shape of it, the just open up advice starts to look about as useful as telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. Let's break down what emotional foreclosure actually looks like in practice, because it doesn't show up as obvious. Misery. That's what makes it so hard to catch. Stage 1 is substitution. The emotional energy that used to go toward connection gets redirected, usually toward things that feel rewarding but carry no relational risk. Work becomes an obsession. Physical training becomes identity. Productivity becomes emotional regulation. These aren't bad things on their own. The problem is the function they're serving. They're not just interests anymore, they're replacements for intimacy. And replacements are always slightly hollow in a way the person can sense but can't quite locate. Stage 2 is reframing. Once the substitution is running, the mind needs a narrative to justify it. So the man starts building an internal story where emotional withdrawal isn't a coping mechanism. It's wisdom. Wanting deep connection wasn't maturity, it was neediness. Romantic love isn't something real adults prioritize. It's a distraction for people who haven't figured themselves out yet. The wall gets rebranded as a philosophy. Stage 3, and this one is the heaviest, is calcification. The reframe becomes a fixed identity. He's not a man who closed down after getting hurt. He's a man who doesn't do all that emotional stuff. It's not a phase, it's a personality trait now, and personality traits are defended, not examined. Consider Adrian, 29 years old, who spent 2 years post-breakup building what he called his ideal life. Woke up at 5, trained, worked 12 hours, read every night. On paper, it was impressive. What he didn't talk about was that he'd essentially eliminated every relationship in his life that required him to be emotionally present. His friendships were surface level. His family relationships were logistical, calls on holidays, practical help when needed, and he genuinely believed he'd evolved past needing anything deeper. The psychology underneath that is fascinating and a little heartbreaking, because Adrian wasn't stronger than his need for connection. He was just more skilled at suppressing it than most people, and suppression is always an energy expenditure. You're not free of the need, you're just constantly spending resources to keep it underwater. What's the actual move here? Not a life overhaul, something much smaller and more honest. Start by identifying where the substitution is running. What's the thing in your life right now that's doing a job it was never designed to do? What are you using as a stand-in for something you stopped letting yourself want? You don't have to blow it up, just name it. Because naming it removes some of the unconscious grip it has on how you're making decisions. And here's where this gets layered in a way that surprised even me when I went deeper on it. Because the effects of this shutdown don't stay contained inside the man. They spill outward. They shape everyone around him. And the way they shape people is often invisible enough that nobody connects the dots. Not him. Not the people being affected. Picture a man who's been emotionally sealed for 5, 6, 7 years. He's not cold, he's not cruel, he's actually pretty functional in most social settings. He can be funny, he can be generous, he can show up when people need practical help. But there's a layer of him that nobody gets to, and the people in his life, even if they can't articulate it, feel that ceiling. His partner, if he has one, learns not to bring certain things up, not because he reacts badly, but because his responses are always slightly off, a little too composed, a little too problem-solving, a little too much like talking to a well-intentioned consultant rather than the person she loves. She starts to feel like she's alone in the relationship, even when he's sitting right next to her. And that specific kind of loneliness, being physically with someone who is emotionally elsewhere, is one of the most corrosive things a relationship can absorb over time. His children, if he has them, grow up with a version of their father who is reliable but unreachable. And children don't pass that as dad is dealing with something. They pass it as evidence about themselves. They learn that they don't have what it takes to reach him. That becomes a story they carry forward about their own worth in the eyes of people they love. That's not a minor thing. That's a blueprint. His friendships have a ceiling. They can go wide, sports, shared history, humour, showing up in practical ways, but they can't go deep. And friendships that can't go deep aren't built to carry real weight. When the heavy seasons come, loss, failure, genuine confusion about life, there's no relational infrastructure to hold it. So those seasons get endured alone, which then reinforces the original belief that he's fundamentally on his own in this life. Step back and absorb that cascade for a second. One man's internal shutdown creates a ring of affected relationships around him, each one slightly stunted, each one reflecting back a version of the world that confirms his original hypothesis. Connection is limited, temporary, or ultimately disappointing. He built the evidence. That's the circular trap of it. So what's the actual intervention? Not therapy necessarily, though for some men that's the right move. The immediate accessible thing is to identify one relationship in your life where you've been showing up at surface level and ask yourself what would happen if you showed up one layer deeper. Not pouring everything out, just one layer. One conversation where instead of "I'm good," you say something closer to what's actually true. And notice what happens. Not to the other person, to you. Notice whether the threat model your nervous system has been running actually matches reality in that moment. Now I need to take this somewhere that gets talked about less. Because most conversations about this topic stop at men need to open up more. That's true and also incomplete. Because before a man can meaningfully open up, something has to shift at a deeper level than behaviour. The operating belief has to change, and operating beliefs don't change through willpower. They change through accumulated experience. So let's talk about how that actually happens. Here's something that doesn't get enough airtime in these conversations. The choice to stay emotionally closed isn't just a psychological pattern, it has a physiological signature. Human beings carry a biological drive towards social bonding that's as fundamental as hunger or sleep. Not a nice to have, a physiological need with measurable consequences when it goes unmet. Research in the field of social neuroscience has shown consistently that chronic emotional isolation, even when someone looks high-functioning from the outside, correlates with elevated inflammatory markers, disrupted sleep architecture, and changes in how the prefrontal cortex regulates emotional response over time. Translation: the body keeps a record of disconnection, whether the mind acknowledges it or not. This explains something a lot of men in this pattern report but can't account for: the low-grade irritability that doesn't track to any specific stressor, the fatigue that rest doesn't fix, the sense of going through motions with everything: work, food, entertainment, social interaction, where nothing quite lands with full weight. These aren't character flaws, they're symptoms. The system is running on a deficit that no amount of optimization is going to compensate for, because the deficit isn't in the routine, it's in the relational bandwidth. Look at someone like Thomas, 42, genuinely accomplished, had built a career and a lifestyle most people would call successful, hadn't been in a real relationship in 4 years, wasn't looking for one, saw a doctor for what he described as running at 60%, functional but dim, like a phone that works fine but somehow never fully charges. His doctor found nothing physically wrong. A year later, through a combination of gradually reintroducing genuine friendship and eventually allowing himself to care about someone again, that dimness started lifting. Not because of any single breakthrough, because the relational deficit was slowly getting addressed. This matters because it reframes what emotional reconnection actually is. It's not a sentimental project. It's not about being softer or more romantic or more expressive in some performative way. It's maintenance. It's the man who takes his health seriously, recognizing that relational health is part of the overall equation, not a separate optional category. The practical direction here is small and specific. If you're someone who's been running low without a clear reason, before you add another supplement or another optimization protocol, ask honestly, when did you last feel genuinely close to someone? When did you last let someone see something real? How long has it been since a conversation left you feeling actually less alone rather than just distracted? The answers tell you something your blood work won't. And this leads to the final dimension of this that I want to address directly. Because most of what gets produced about men and emotional shutdown focuses on what men should do differently, which is fair. But it misses half the picture. Because men don't arrive at the void alone, and they don't find their way out alone either. The environment around them is part of the equation in both directions. If you've spent any time caring about a man who's pulled back from connection, as a partner, a sibling, a friend, you know how disorienting it is. You can feel the wall, but you can't find the door. Pushing harder doesn't work. Being emotionally demonstrative around someone who's sealed up often increases their defensiveness rather than dissolving it. So what does actually work? Consistency over intensity? That's the answer, and it's less dramatic than people want it to be. A man who's built his survival strategy around the belief that emotional openness leads to being hurt isn't going to be unlocked by one powerful conversation or one honest moment of connection. What his nervous system needs to see is repeated evidence over time that the people in his life aren't going anywhere, and that their presence isn't conditional on him performing emotional availability. Unconditional presence is different from unconditional acceptance of all behaviour. You can have boundaries, you can be honest about impact, but there's a specific quality of "I'm still here, and I'm not treating you like a project to fix" that cuts through in a way that pressure never does. The other thing that reaches men in the void, often unexpectedly, is practical solidarity during high-stakes moments. Not "let's talk about your feelings," but sitting next to someone in a hospital waiting room, helping someone move, showing up for the boring, unsexy, genuinely hard moments without making it about emotional processing. A lot of men have their first real moment of emotional re-entry not through a conversation, but through an experience of being shown, in action, that someone regards them as worth their time without a relational agenda attached. Ethan, 37, had his turning point when his closest friend from college drove 4 hours to help him deal with a flooded apartment. Said almost nothing about feelings the whole time, just worked alongside him for 8 hours straight, ordered food and stayed until it was handled. It was the first time in years Ethan had felt genuinely less alone, not because of what was said, because of what was demonstrated without being said. From there, small things opened, slowly, imperfectly. But the direction shifted. Ryan eventually came back from the concrete place, not through a relationship, through a confrontation with himself that happened alone at 3 a.m. after a conversation with his dad that didn't go the way he expected. His father, who he'd always seen as stoic and unreachable, said something he never expected. He said, "I used to think feeling nothing was the same as being strong. It's not. It's just not being there." That landed somewhere deep, not because it was revelatory information, because it came from the one man Ryan had used as evidence that closing down was the right move. The model had spoken, and the model was telling him the model was wrong. The void doesn't announce itself. That's the most important thing to carry away from all of this. It moves in slowly, dressed up as self-reliance, as focus, as maturity. It offers relief that's real enough to be convincing, and it asks for nothing in return, which feels like freedom, until you realize that freedom and emptiness are not the same country, even when they share a border. The capacity to love and be loved doesn't disappear when you stop using it. It waits, impatiently, sometimes, quietly, usually. But it waits, and the distance between where a man in the void is standing and where that capacity lives is almost never as far as the void makes it feel. The first step back is never the hardest one. The hardest one is accepting that a step back is possible at all.